Hello, welcome to Enterprise Architecture Podcast. Today we will talk about Enterprise Architecture Practice, a modern approach to business and IT alignment. Let's go for it.
Okay, so, we hear a lot about enterprise architecture these days, but it can feel kind of like a maze sometimes, right? Like you're swimming in a sea of frameworks and buzzwords, and honestly, who even knows where to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's this real disconnect between the theory and the reality of EA, like how it's supposed to work, versus what's actually happening out there in the trenches.
Right. It's
Yeah,
like you need a secret decoder ring just to understand what people are even talking about half the time.
exactly. And that's what we're here for today, to cut through all that noise and give you some practical insights based on real research and real world stories.
Yeah, no more jargon, just the good stuff.
Yeah.
And speaking of good stuff, I get this one study found that like 80% of companies who said they were using TOGIAF, that big, scary framework, they ended up changing it like a lot.
It's true. And it just goes to show that successful EA is way more about being pragmatic than about rigidly following some rule book.
So it's less about checking boxes and more about actually solving problems.
Exactly. It's about communication, not dogma. Think about it like this. You're trying to build a skyscraper, but the architects only speak Italian and the construction crew only speaks Japanese.
hmm
What could possibly go wrong?
Oh man, I can already see the blueprints flying out the window.
Right, total chaos. And that's what it's like trying to align business goals with technology without a common language. EA is that bridge. It's how you make sure everyone's speaking the same language, whether they're thinking about the big picture or writing lines of code.
So it's less about technical jargon and more about making sure everyone is on the same page.
You got it. And that's where the three core processes of EA come in. They're like the blueprint, the construction plan, and the ongoing maintenance all rolled into one.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us. What are these core processes?
So first up, you've got strategic planning. This is all about connecting the dots between those big picture business goals and the technology you need to make them a reality. It's about making sure your IT landscape is aligned with where you want to go as a company.
So using our skyscraper analogy, it's like making sure the building is designed to withstand earthquakes if you're in California, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's about understanding the context, the big picture, and building for the long term. Now, once you have the plan, you need to actually start building right. That's where initiative delivery comes in. It's all about turning those strategic plans into real, concrete IT projects.
Let's talk more action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could have the most beautiful blueprint for a skyscraper in the world, but if no one knows how to read it or pour concrete, it's just a pretty picture.
Okay, so it's like making sure those blueprints don't just become wall art. Someone's got to actually swing a hammer.
Precisely. And then finally, we have technology optimization. So imagine our skyscraper is now a few years old. Systems start to get outdated. Things break down. That shiny new building starts to show some wear and tear.
Let me guess, this is where that ominous sounding IT debt comes in.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Think of it like this. Every shortcut you take, every quick fix you implement adds to your IT debt. It's the cost of not addressing the underlying issues. And eventually that debt comes due.
So it's like putting off those repairs until suddenly you've got a leaky roof and faulty wiring, and it's going to cost you a fortune to fix.
Exactly. Technology optimization is all about tackling those issues, proactively keeping things running smoothly, and avoiding a major meltdown down the road.
So it's about making sure your technology is working for you, not against you.
100%.
Yeah.
And to actually do that, to make this all happen, we use what are called EA artifacts. They're the documents and tools that bring these processes to life.
Artifacts. Okay, so like, are we talking about ancient scrolls and sacred relics here? What are we dealing with?
Not quite,
Yeah.
but they are important. Think of it like a hierarchy, moving from the big picture, why, all the way down to the nitty-gritty, how. You start with considerations.
Yeah.
These are like the city planning documents for your skyscraper. They set the overall context for your IT decisions.
So it's like making sure your skyscraper isn't going to block everyone else's view of the ocean.
Exactly. Then we move on to standards. These are all about the how, the best practices, the guidelines, the rules that help you avoid those, oh no, the building is collapsing scenarios.
Sounds important. What's next?
Next, we have visions. And this is where things get really exciting. Visions are all about the what. It's your aspirational view of the future IT landscape. It's a dazzling architectural model of that skyscraper you're aiming to build.
Okay, so we've got the why, the how, and the what. What about the where are we now? That feels like a pretty crucial piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. And that's where landscapes come in. Think of these as those time-lapse photos of a construction site. They provide a clear snapshot of your current IT systems, what's working, what's not, and what might need some serious renovation.
So it's like doing an inventory before you start knocking down walls and putting up new drywall.
Exactly. Once you understand your starting point, you can start sketching out those renovation plans. That's where outlines come in. These are the high-level plans for IT projects. Think of them as those initial sketches of your skyscraper's different floors before you get into the detailed blueprints.
It's about getting those ideas down on paper, seeing how everything fits together.
Precisely. And finally, you arrive at designs, the detailed blueprints and technical specifications that your IT team will use to actually build those new systems.
So, to bring back our analogy one last time, this is where the rubber meets the road, or maybe the concrete meets the rebar.
I think you've officially exhausted the skyscraper metaphor.
Fair enough. But it's a good one. It really helps visualize how these different artifacts build on each other.
It does. And speaking of building, one of the most common questions we get is, who are these architects everyone's talking about?
Right, it's a title that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean to be an enterprise architect?
It's not about being a tech wizard, although technical expertise is definitely part of it. The real skill is being able to translate between those different worlds, the business folks with their strategic goals and the IT folks with their code. They're like the diplomats of the tech world, if you will.
I like that, diplomats of the tech world. So, are we talking about a specific person here, or more of a role that people can play?
It's a bit of both. You have individuals with the title enterprise architect, but you also have different types of architects who specialize in certain areas. You've got your solution architects who are laser focused on designing specific systems. They're the ones deep in the blueprints, making sure everything fits together technically.
Okay, so they're all about the nuts and bolts of making it work.
Exactly. Then you have your domain architects who have deep expertise in specific areas like data or security. They're like those specialized contractors who make sure the plumbing and electrical are up to code.
And what about those business unit architects I keep hearing about?
They're the ones living in both worlds, making sure that technology solutions align with the very specific needs of different departments. They're like the liaisons between the overall skyscraper project and the team designing the rooftop garden, making sure everyone's vision is aligned.
So many moving parts, it sounds like you need a conductor to make sure it all comes together harmoniously.
That's a great analogy. And many organizations do have an architecture manager who plays that role, overseeing the team, keeping things on track, and making sure everyone's playing from the same sheet of music, so to speak.
Okay, so let's say you've got this amazing team of architects assembled. Where do they even begin? It all sounds a bit overwhelming.
And that's a common concern. One of the biggest mistakes companies make is trying to boil the ocean with EA. They try to do too much at once, get bogged down in complexity, and end up right back where they started, frustrated and with a pile of useless documents.
So what's the alternative? How do you actually make EA work in the real world?
It's about starting small, building credibility, and proving the value of EA one step at a time. Remember those artifacts we talked about earlier. You don't need to tackle them all at once. Choose one or two that align with your most pressing needs and start there.
So if you're struggling to even get a clear picture of your current IT landscape, you might start with landscapes.
Exactly. Or if you're finding that different teams are constantly reinventing the wheel, maybe you start with standards to establish some common practices. It's about demonstrating the value of EA in a tangible way so people start to see the benefits and buy into the process.
It's about building that momentum and showing that EA isn't just another abstract concept. It can actually solve real-world problems. Now, I'm curious, how does all of this tie back to the business strategy? It can't just be about drawing pretty diagrams, right?
You're right. It's not about the diagrams themselves. It's about what they represent. And here's where it gets interesting. The research suggests that starting with the formal business strategy document might actually be the wrong approach.
Wait, really? I thought aligning IT with the business strategy was the whole point of EA.
It is. But using that strategy document as your starting point can lead to what one of our sources called the alignment trap. And it makes sense when you think about it. Business strategies are constantly changing, priorities shift, new opportunities emerge, the market throws you a curveball. And if your IT landscape is constantly chasing the latest version of the strategy, you end up with a mess.
So instead of a solid foundation, you've got a bunch of disjointed pieces that don't quite fit together.
Exactly. And that's a recipe for IT debt, inefficient systems, redundant technologies, and a whole lot of wasted time and money.
So if the formal business strategy isn't the ideal starting point, what is? Where should EA practitioners focus their energy instead?
Our sources point to a few key discussion points that offer a more stable and actionable foundation for IT planning. One of the most important is the organization's operating model.
Operating model, that sounds familiar, but remind me what it means in this context.
Think of it as the DNA of your organization. It defines how you operate, how you make decisions, how information flows. Some common operating models are diversification, coordination, replication, and unification. Each has different implications for how technology is used and managed.
So understanding operating model is like understanding the underlying structure of the organization, the bones of the building, so to speak.
Precisely. For example, a company with a diversification model might have a lot of independent business units, each with their own IT systems, whereas a coordination model prioritizes integration and data sharing across the organization, and that will drastically impact how you approach your IT architecture.
Makes sense. So instead of chasing a constantly changing strategy, you're aligning your IT with the more fundamental aspects of how the business operates.
You got it. Another key discussion point is business capabilities. Remember those visions we talked about earlier, the what of EA? Well, business capabilities provide a framework for defining those aspirations.
So instead of just saying, we want to improve customer service, you'd break that down into specific capabilities like order tracking or personalized recommendations.
Exactly. By mapping those capabilities to the organization's overall goals, you can start to see which areas of IT need the most attention and investment.
It's about getting granular, really understanding the building blocks of what makes the business successful.
Precisely. And once you have a clear understanding of the operating model and the key business capabilities, you can start having much more focused and productive conversations about technology.
It's like shifting the conversation from what kind of technology do we want to what are we actually trying to achieve and how can technology help us get there?
Exactly. It's about moving away from that technology-first mindset and really understanding the business context. Now, before we move on to the how of implementing EA, there's one more important concept we need to unpack: architecture debt.
Ooh, that sounds like something you don't want to be in debt to. What exactly is architecture debt?
It's a way of thinking about those hidden costs of shortcuts and quick fixes we talked about earlier. Remember how we said that cutting corners during construction can lead to problems down the road? Costly repairs, structural weaknesses, things that limit the building's lifespan.
Right, and we said it's the same with IT. Those Band-Aid solutions eventually catch up with you.
Exactly. Architecture debt is essentially the cost of fixing those problems, of modernizing your IT landscape and bringing it up to par. It's the price you pay for not investing strategically in the first place.
So how does this concept tie into the work of EA?
In a few key ways. First, it highlights the importance of that technology optimization process we discussed earlier. You need to actively manage that debt, just like you would financial debt, to prevent it from spiraling out of control.
So it's not just about building new things, it's about maintaining and improving what you already have.
Exactly. Second, this concept of architecture debt can be a powerful communication tool, especially when you're talking to stakeholders who might not be tech savvy. It helps you quantify the cost of inaction, the long-term implications of those quick fixes and workarounds.
It's like putting a dollar amount on those shortcuts so people can make more informed decisions about where to invest their resources.
Precisely. And finally, architecture debt can help shift the conversation from a purely technical perspective to a strategic one. It's not just about fixing code. It's about aligning IT investments with the organization's long-term goals.
It's about making sure that your technology is an enabler of success, not an obstacle. This concept of architecture debt is really eye-opening. It makes you realize that EA is about much more than just drawing diagrams and choosing technologies. It's about making strategic decisions that impact the entire organization. It really highlights the strategic dimension of technology, doesn't it?
You've got me thinking, how do you actually implement all of this?
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about EA in theory, but how do you build that bridge from theory to reality within a company?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's something a lot of organizations really struggle with. It's tempting to think you can just, make an announcement like, okay, everyone, we're doing EA now.
Yeah.
And expect everyone to just fall in line. But it doesn't really work that way.
Right. It's not like flipping a switch. You need to bring people along on the journey. So
Yeah.
where do you even begin? Well, the research really emphasizes that even just introducing EA is a process, not just this one-time event.
Yeah.
You need to build those capabilities gradually. It's
Yeah.
almost like you're assembling like a skilled orchestra, one musician at a time.
I like that analogy. So who's the conductor in this scenario?
That's a great question. And this is key. One of the first steps is getting buy-in from senior leadership, those champions at the top who really understand the value of EA and are willing to invest the resources to make it work.
So you need those influential voices who can really set the tone and get everyone on board.
Absolutely. You need that leadership support to cut through all the noise and create the space for EA to really flourish. Once you have that, then you can start building your team of architects. Remember all those different roles we talked about? Solution architects, domain architects, all those folks.
Yeah, those diplomats of the tech world. Gotta love them.
Exactly. You might not need all of those roles filled right away, but it's important to have a core team with that right mix of skills and experience folks who can champion that EA mindset and really make it contagious.
So it's about having those skilled communicators who can bridge the gap between the tech side and the business side?
Exactly. And as you're building your team, you also need to establish the processes and structures that will support good EA practice. Think of it like setting up the stage, making sure the acoustics are right, getting all the instruments in tune before the orchestra can really start playing beautiful music together.
So things like creating an architecture review board or setting up regular meetings to discuss progress and challenges?
Exactly. It's about creating that framework for collaboration and communication, so everyone is truly on the same page, working towards those shared goals.
It's about building a culture of EA, not just a team of architects.
You got it. And as you start to establish those foundations, you can then start introducing those EA artifacts we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But remember, start small, focus on one or two at a time, and build from there. It's about demonstrating value, building momentum, and getting people excited about the possibilities.
It's like learning a new musical instrument. You wouldn't try to play a concerto on your first day, right? You start with the basics, build your skills, and gradually take on more complex pieces.
Exactly. EA is a lot like learning an instrument. And just like learning an instrument, EA is an ongoing process of learning and adapting and improving. There's no one-size-fits-all approach here. What works for one organization might not work for another, and that's okay.
So how do you figure out what's going to work best for your organization?
That's where learning from others comes in. Talk to e-practitioners at other companies, read case studies, attend conferences. There's so much knowledge out there. And don't be afraid to experiment. EA is a dynamic field. The best practitioners are the ones who are constantly learning, adapting, and evolving their approach.
It's about embracing that agile mindset, being flexible and responsive to change. Now, before we wrap up, I'm curious about those external EA consultants. We've been talking about building an internal EA practice, but so many companies turn to outside experts. What's your take on that?
Consultants can definitely play a valuable role, but our sources do offer some words of caution.
No, I'm always up for a good cautionary tale. What should companies watch out for?
One major red flag is what's often called the document and dash approach. This is where consultants come in, they analyze everything, create this massive report, and then poof, they're gone, leaving the company with a stack of paper and no idea what to actually do with it.
Oh man, those dusty binders full of recommendations that never see the light of day. We've all seen those.
Exactly. And it just highlights this key point. The real value of EA isn't in the documentation itself. It's in the process of actually using those artifacts to drive conversations, make decisions, and create real change within an organization.
So it's about finding those consultants who are invested in working with your team, not just for them, folks who are focused on knowledge transfer and building lasting capabilities.
Absolutely. Another important thing is to be very clear upfront about the outcomes you're looking for. What are the specific challenges you're trying to solve? What kind of support do you need? You don't want to be paying for generic advice when what you really need is targeted expertise.
It's about making sure everyone is on the same page from day one. Now, I do have one final lingering question for you. We've talked a lot about the technical aspects of EA, but if it's really about communication and collaboration, are we undervaluing those soft skills in this field?
What a fantastic point to end on. And I'd say absolutely we are. It's not enough to be a technical whiz.
Yeah.
You need to be able to bring people along on the journey to articulate the value of EA in a way that resonates with different audiences to get people excited about the possibilities.
It's about those skills we often associate with leadership, storytelling, persuasion, building consensus, inspiring action.
Exactly. The best EA practitioners out there aren't just technical experts. They're also skilled communicators and collaborators. They can navigate the technical complexities, But they can also build bridges between departments, break down silos, and create that shared understanding of how technology can truly enable an organization's success.
Wow, this deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. It's clear that EA is about so much more than just technology. It's about strategy, it's about people, it's about creating a shared vision for the future.
I couldn't agree more. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this conversation, it's this. EA isn't about finding that perfect framework or building a flawless architecture on the first try. It's about embracing continuous learning, adaptation, and collaboration. It's about building that team of skilled communicators who can bridge those gaps between business and technology and use their expertise to drive real lasting value for their organizations.
It's not just about the what of EA, it's about the who and the how as well. And with that, I think we've reached the summit of our deep dive into enterprise architecture. Hopefully you're feeling energized and equipped to navigate this exciting field. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to us. We hope you enjoyed it. Please comment and if possible, subscribe.